So good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us as part of NENA Housing Week tonight on Thursday, the 10th of November, where we continue the discussions that began with a different group of folks at lunchtime looking at sustainable housing. But before I give you a reminder about what NENA Housing Week and NENA itself is all about, I'd like to acknowledge country. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work and play here in the beautiful lands of the Yagara Turrbal peoples. I live in North Brisbane. I'd like to acknowledge elders past and present and the emerging leaders, young people and old, who are continuing their ancient traditions and caring for country and caring for each other. Here in the New Economy Network, we have a dedicated focus on decolonising our hearts and minds and working in solidarity with our Indigenous friends and colleagues. NENA itself is made up of quite a large number now of different sectoral hubs, as well as geographic hubs as well. So I'd like to urge all of you to do the usual Zoom tradition, which we have now, which is lovely, where people pop in whose country they're on, say hello, let people know where you're from. So who is NENA? The New Economy Network Australia started to form up around 2016 and was sort of launched in 2017 and was incorporated as a cooperative in 2019. So we've been lurking around for 5 or 6 years now. You do have to excuse me if there's a squeaky toy noise in the background. It's because I'm handling a puppy. I do apologise because I had to step in at last minute notice. I didn't have anyone to keep an eye on him. But the New Economy Network Australia is really devoted to bringing individuals and organisations together at a peer-to-peer way, peer-to-peer level, to share information, to promote good things, to develop shared projects. And we do a lot of webinars, conferences, discussions, roundtables, and a range of ways of helping people collaborate. What we're interested in is challenging the current dominant economic system, industrial extractivism, and we're passionate about trying to build a society that's regenerative and that has an economy that serves people and planet. So if you're new to NENA and you're not a member, please do think about joining us. We are a volunteer-led, volunteer-managed cooperative, and we're really just trying to raise the profile of community voices and professional voices about what the economy is and should be. And keep an eye out next year. We've got a big, fat, glorious conference happening. It's going to be a lot more than just a talk fest. We're going to have a lot of projects going on in October or November in Canberra. But without further ado, I'm really delighted to introduce two of our speakers. I am watching, but I'm not sure if our third speaker has joined us. If you are there and perhaps I can't see you with your names, do let me know. Otherwise, tonight we're talking about sustainable housing. And we're joined by Adam Russell, Andy Marlowe, and Ananya Majumdar, if Ananya appears. Adam and Andy are both rather fabulous architects doing fascinating projects, but I'm going to let them talk about their work. And our format tonight will be probably aim for a 15-minute talk each. If our third speaker doesn't arrive, you can obviously go over a little bit, and then we'll have some Q&A. So if you've got questions for our speakers, please pop them in the chat at any time. And then towards the end, you can also just call out and ask a question. So I think we're going to go with Adam first. Is that right, Adam?
I'm happy with that. Okay, so thanks, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Adam. Over to you. I'll take the spotlight off Andy and myself so that it's all about you. Talking about sustainable housing.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'll just share my screen. I'm a practicing architect and doing lots of things in addition to architecture these days. My practice is with my life partner, Susie Pickles, and called Saltbush. We're small and we're located on Dharawal country, unceded Dharawal country, beautiful Illawarra, just south of Sydney. I want to jump straight into being a bit provocative tonight because when I studied at university 25 years ago, sustainability was a big thing, and my semi-thesis was on sustainability, and I feel like we've been treading water for a long time. So I've called my talk "The Lights Are On, but Nobody's Home," and this is it's a maxim, obviously, which implies that sometimes people aren't as smart or switched on or intuitive as they could be or should be. But also, quite literally, if the lights are on in a sustainable house, which has solar panels and a battery, and nobody's home, is it still a sustainable house? I'll just leave that question hanging. What this is an introduction to, though, is this concept of akrasia, which is a beautiful word with Greek origin, which means a weakness of will, or acting in a way that's contrary to one's sincerely held moral values. So if you know what needs to be done to make the world more sustainable, yet your daily behavior is working against that despite your knowledge, that is a moment of akrasia where despite your best knowledge, and I think all of us do that, it's a big claim, but I travel internationally from time to time with a huge carbon footprint. I have a motor vehicle, which is partly electric, but does use petrol as well. I shop in supermarkets and so on. So this concept of akrasia, I think, where we reflect on what we know is best, yet somehow still collectively we can't act on that knowledge. So I'm really interested in not so much building performance, but in addition to building performance, human performance, and how humans use buildings, housing in this instance, to live in, and how the housing and the human perform together. And it's something I've been teaching in for about a decade now, in architecture schools, teaching students to think about what they design in terms of what it allows or doesn't allow, or encourages or discourages in terms of human behavior. I think it's often overlooked in sustainability parlance. I've been through a bit of a slow epiphany in my practice as an architect over the last 3 or 4 years, just having a bit of a realization that working big projects in Sydney and trying to change from within was just not getting anywhere, and moved out of Sydney and it's almost started afresh with a bit of a recalibration. And part of that recalibrating was realizing that these beautiful places, like my background behind me here and the image on screen, are habitat and housing for every other species other than ourselves, depending on where you are in the world. And as humans, when we enter these places, we instantly feel a sense of calmness. Time slows down a little bit, a sense of connectedness. And these places sustain life as closed systems or loops. But when we look at how we sustain our own lives these days, this is a bit of a common confrontation or image: the daily trip or weekly trip to the supermarket, where the things we need to sustain us are coming from all around the state, the country, and often all around the world. It's just where we're at as humanity, I think. Interestingly, just talking about buildings and sustainability, the average water footprint of our one person's daily food intake is 25 times bigger than one person's daily domestic consumption. Just to give you a sense of what's being sustained where and by when. So your sustainable house that you're living in, the food you eat, if you're buying it through these sort of normal ways, through supermarkets, has 25 times bigger water footprint than your house does with its domestic load. We've done a big downshift moving out of Sydney and moved to a larger plot where we are able to grow our own food, or not all of it, but a fair bit of our own food. And we're starting to see, I think, and feel this great sense of coincidence between that first image of a thriving living ecology in the bush where we feel at ease, and an alternative to that supermarket image where we feel like we're stuck within this acrasia moment, where to sustain ourselves, we have to participate in this global economy of food. So sorry, yeah, this is our backyard on an open garden day, with a shed in the corner of the house is just out of view. And this cartoon sums those last few words up really nicely for me, where you see the whiz-bang architect designed house with a lot of square meters per person that may or may not sleep in it, wet edge pool, wall-to-wall glass. But the family that live there, actually, they find their joy down in the back corner of the garden, getting their feet dirty in the paddling pool, sitting in the shed. And to me, that's sort of something hidden in most humans, and we feel it when we feel it, but we don't think it up front enough. So I've started rethinking architectural practice, not as designing buildings, but curating systems and flows, energy, water, nutrients, materials, and people. And another term for that is culturing ecologies, if you like. So that's out of permaculture, where we look at culture, ecologies that are just cultured and modified by human input rather than destroyed. And this image in the middle here is a very old image in architecture. It's very famous. It's the primitive hut, where basic needs for food, water, and shelter are sort of implied in this most primitive form of living. In a way, that's sort of harking back to the relationship we once had with country and landscape. I'm just going to talk through a couple of little projects now and then finish up on a larger co-housing project I'm working on at the moment. So this is a small renovation for friends, and we really found the language of the existing beautiful old house, which was very leaky, and then manipulated it or cultured it a little bit with a lifted roof to the rear. Worked with predominantly natural and biodegradable materials to provide some better daylight and a much better connection to the garden where they raise chickens and grow vegetables. A lot of the work we were doing on this was being sympathetic to neighbours to the south to keep their sun lines for their own food production. And most of the elements were put together with bolts and screws, not nails and glues. So the renovation was almost thought of as a store for materials for the next renovation somewhere else. Another project, here's where I say I'm an architect, but not necessarily making buildings every day. This was a catering job that Susie and I actually did, Saltbush did, for Simon Anderson, who some of you may know. He's a Sydney architect, famous for his off-grid house in the Blue Mountains. He's a great friend of ours. And they asked us, they knew we had a big productive garden in Bulli and asked us to cater for his 50th birthday at the off-grid house. It was a really awesome event. We planned the food, grew the food, cooked, served, and ate. There was one small dilemma when the 50 people turned up for the party and it had been cloudy for 4 days, and we realised that the battery was only 30% full, and the pump for the toilet system would have needed all of that, and we were unable to cook in the oven in the house. So we cooked almost everything on the fire, and we zoomed back to someone's accommodation to cook one or two things. But that was a really interesting and fun day, and kind of something I get a lot of pleasure out of beyond designing just buildings. This is our house in Bulli, and just really quickly, I just wanted to demonstrate what's possible within 2.5 years. We've lived here for 2.5 years. When we moved in, it was almost all lawn. There was one bottle brush tree in the front and a grand flagpole. and that's the aerial on the left. And this photo is about 2 years afterwards, maybe a year and a half after we moved in. And now it's an incredibly abundant place with all sorts of food, chickens, beehives, and so on. We're lucky we get lots of sunshine and we have good soil. But me shifting away from designing buildings to designing systems sort of was informed pretty heavily by some additional studies that both Susie and I have done. I studied permaculture design and permaculture education, and I'm also studying at the Living Future Institute to become an accredited practitioner there. But actually the relationship between the house and the landscape has become far more important in my design thinking than the envelope of the building. The taut envelope where you have optimal air quality inside, temperature, humidity, and oxygen exchange and comfort, and you have the wild outside. Opposite to that, most of our thinking and work has been about relationships through those thresholds and deep thresholds where you have transitional spaces. The house is open most of the time and we wear coats and Ugg boots if it's a little bit cold, but we're forever in and out. Here's just some pictures of the house about a year ago. We built a large balcony on the front where we eat most meals in good weather. And the neighbours were awestruck by it, wondering why we put the back deck on the front deck, on the front. I've become a beekeeper, and the garden is generally providing quite a bit, and we do a bit of trade with neighbours with a little honesty box system at the front. Just going to check time. All right, I've probably got about 7 minutes, hopefully. So now I'm just going to move into a larger scale project that I've been working on for a while now, and talk through the Living Building Challenge, which is a philosophy advocacy tool and certification program that some of you may know, many of you may know. For me, it's something I've found that dovetails most closely with where my practice of design as a designer has evolved to. And it's definitely an accountability system that through performance measures, not prescribing particular types of technologies or equipment or insulation build-up, but more baseline performances of the building compared to business as usual. So very quickly, the Living Building Challenge is structured around 7 petals, they call them. Place, which is restoring a healthy interrelationship with nature. Water, which is net positive water use. Energy, net positive energy use. Health and happiness optimizes the well-being of people and other creatures, I would say. Materials that are safe for all species through time. Equity, supporting a just and equitable world. And beauty, uplifting the human spirit. So many of these have a deep need for people to understand them and modify their behavior for them to work. And I think that's probably one of the key points I'd like to get across in this talk. And as an architect, I feel obliged now that part of my job is designing spaces and environments that help people learn how to change their ways a little bit. So Glendara Co-housing is a co-housing project in the Blue Mountains, in the mid-mountains. It's about a 5-minute walk from Hazelbrook Station. We're lodging a DA early next year. It's a 12 small dwelling layout with a common building in the heart. So the common building sits here and the dwellings sit in 3 clusters. So they're almost like sub-communities. And they sit in a landscape which is fairly untouched bush or intact bush at the lower northern end of the site. And then at the peak of the hill, the crest of the hill, it's a little eroded and degraded around an existing house which sits about there. And then there's some pine plantation on the street at the front. This is a view from the street side from the south. So entry here. I'll quickly talk you through the site organisation and layout and some of the logic behind it. And then I'm going to go through how the Living Building Challenge has informed some of these decisions and the overlays of how the Living Building Challenge might play out. So we kept an existing driveway through here rather than recontouring the site for bicycles, vehicles and pedestrians. And that is a nice arc that brings you to common building located in the centre of the site with a northeast aspect that picks up on some good views to bushland and the big smoke, as we like to call it. Council are imposing 15 vehicle spaces on us, and we're trying to provide them in numerous different ways so that the spaces that they occupy can be adapted by residents down the track for other uses. So there's a double lock-up garage here that could become an exhibition space or creative space. There's a small, it's not a basement, but parking area that's encaptured within the ground floor of Group 1 buildings. And then there's some hard stand parking at the back here, which will be porous paved and has potential for some garage and carport structures that can be used for other uses down the track. Then all of the pedestrian movement is prioritised and made graceful and stair-free, so you can get to all three clusters and the common building without a step. And there's a lift in Group 1 building to get to the upper level and a lift in the common building. And then the dwellings in Group 2 and Group 3 are fully accessible from the ground level and have some additional floor space at the lower level, which I don't have here. Then upstairs in Group 1, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 additional units. All dwellings face north, apart from one unit at the front, which faces the street and has a good street address. And the common building has 2 small rooms that could be used by occasional guests or living carers now and then, as agreed to by the community. There's a commercial kitchen downstairs and a dining space, a shared laundry, and upstairs there's a large lounge that's sort of in 2 parts with a quiet room and a room with the view. So that's the existing site. I'm not going to dwell on that one, but that house, it will be demolished, and that's the existing road coming in. Then on the right-hand side here are a very brief summary of the requirements of the Living Building Challenge that we're attempting to meet. I think on reflection, the Living Building Challenge is really well suited to large corporate, commercial or institutional clients that have a budget. They have a lot of buildings each decade, and they have a budget to make one of them exemplary. It's quite expensive and involved for a smaller project like this to get full certification. However, the intentions and ambitions behind it have been an amazing template for us to follow. And if we get 3/4 baked rather than fully cooked, I'm pretty happy with that. We certainly won't be half baked. All right, so under the place petal, we need to provide an ecologically positive landscape that has a relationship with the surrounding landscape and ecology. We need to offer sunny spaces for growing healthy food, which we do in the heart through here. We need to preserve or offset habitat equal to the project area. We've got about 1/5 of the site, which will be original habitat, and then we're going to regenerate some at the street frontage. And then there would be an offset where we make a financial contribution to habitat regeneration in another place. A reduction of fossil fuel use and occupant evaluations after 1 year of occupancy regarding quality of daylight, air quality, and natural connections between natural outdoor and the interiors. Under beauty, we will run a 1-day biophilic design workshop, and from that, we'll have a biophilic design framework and strategy that will guide the project. And then during and after the project is built, we will maintain a website and open days so that the public can engage and be aware of how things are going and what we're hoping to achieve and what we end up achieving. Underwater, there'll be no potable water used for irrigation. So irrigation will be rainwater and grey water. General water use should be less than the baseline consumption of this type of housing in this region. And 100% of water used on site must come from rainfall and closed loop systems. So the intention is to try and close the water loop. Same sort of thing with energy, aiming for below 70% of the benchmark for this type of housing, intending to collect 105% of energy needs per annum. So that ends up being averaged across winter and summer, and offset all embodied carbon from construction. These are the full Living Building Challenge certification, these ambitions here, or imperatives. We may not be able to achieve some of them, but at the moment we're entertaining most of them. Health and happiness, minimum indoor air qualities to maintain, minimizing of VOCs, using safe cleaning products and so on. All of these need to be documented in an operational manual and under the sort of agreement of the co-housing tenants. Direct connections with nature, which we don't struggle with in the Blue Mountains. Occupation evaluations. Then under materials is very onerous and very expensive to achieve full sign-off on. But the intention, if you were to, would be to use renewable materials wherever possible, or at least salvage or retain structures that are there for reuse. Avoid red listed chemicals in at least 90% of new materials. Sometimes hard to do with things like heat exchange units or heat pumps. Source materials from transparent and responsible suppliers. Support local economies, minimize transport energy, and minimize waste at all stages. So you can see here a lot of these imperatives are not so much about the thermal performance of the built envelope, but they're community and socially oriented intents. Equity, the project must be accessible for all members of the public. We have a 3-story fall on our site, and that's been quite a challenge to get stair-free access from the street to the common building and to all 3 clusters of housing, but we've achieved it, and we're happy about that. Then there's also an imperative to support minority and disadvantaged groups. So when we're specifying materials or tradespeople, we make record of whether they're minority or disadvantaged groups and try and include those groups. So I don't know if anyone's seen this diagram before from Bill Reed. We're a Genesis group. I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but I just like it for how it describes what I've been through over the last 4 to 5 years, moving from working in Sydney on large projects and trying to affect change from within, to restructuring my whole lifestyle, no longer having this, I'm a sustainability architect in my job and I have my other life on the side, but bringing the two together and walking my talk. Briefly, the graph looks at, or the diagram looks at, conventional behaviours and design on the left.
Hey, Adam, I hate to interrupt, but I'm just letting you know that time is sort of up. So.
Oh, is it? Okay. All right. Yeah. This is my second last slide, I think.
That's okay.
All right. All right. Do you want me to stop right there, or 30
no,
seconds?
Never. I like people to finish the.
All right. Okay. Sustainability is a balancing point in the middle, and we've heard the language change from sustainability to regenerative design, and I like here particularly each extreme, the technical system design, where it's about efficiency, doing things right, technologies and techniques and fragmented quantitative thinking to living system design, where we're qualitative, we're looking at systems and relationships, patterns thinking, living and whole systems, and it's about effective design rather than efficient design. I am not going to talk about this because it takes about a minute. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time. And I hope that was interesting and sparked some questions and comments for discussion.
Thank you, Adam. That was excellent. And I do hate interrupting speakers.
No, that's good. When
if
I
it's
showed
daytime,
slides,
I don't bother, but at nighttime, I know people fade by the end. So
I didn't have a timer visible, so I couldn't pace myself.
you did very well. But thank you, Adam.
All right. Thank you.
And just before I introduce Andy Marlowe, I want to apologise because I erroneously forgot to mention that Rob McLeod is also going to be joining us from Renew. So originally we were going to have 4 speakers, but it looks like our 4th speaker isn't here with us. So 3 speakers it is, and I'll introduce Rob shortly. So thank you very much, Adam. And now, Andy, would love to have you come and speak with us. Let me see. I shall put the spotlight on you. So Andy Marlowe, thanks for joining us tonight. And I know you're going to be talking about passive houses.
Yes, indeed. Are those slides working?
They are indeed.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity. Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see you in the various digital forms I currently see you. I have a cold, so if I'm harder to understand than usual, I apologize. I'll do my best. I also can't see the timer. Yes, I can. Okay, cool. Okay, so my name's Andy Marlowe. I'm an architect. I'm going to talk a bit about Passive House this evening. Adam's done an awesome job of talking about sort of the massive picture of everything to do with design and architecture. So I'm kind of appreciative of that because it means I can sort of just focus in on this one little bit. He's danced around it in various different ways, but this really is about the way we build the actual buildings itself, really. So I'm going to touch on a few different aspects of that, mainly how they relate to, well, sustainable housing. And as Adam kind of started off by questioning at the start, what the hell does sustainable housing mean anyway? A little bit briefly about us. Us is Envirotecture. Our company's been around for 25 years, it turns out. My business partner started it 25 years ago, funnily enough. And we've been doing sustainable house things ever since. What that means changes all the time. It's an evolving feast, and that makes it really interesting, which is both good and challenging on a daily basis. In recent years, we have ended up doing a lot of certified passive house projects. This started about 6 years ago. It stemmed from a particular client pushing for certain things, to which this system was an answer. And what I'm mainly going to do now is talk about what that is, why we do it, and the benefits, etc., etc. But I guess what I want to underpin everything by really is in the same way Adam was talking about, I guess, the motivations for what he currently does and how he does it. We have not dissimilar at all, usual thing, furious agreement on almost everything. Our main big picture goal is to change the way that things are built and designed to drive bigger, better outcomes at a bigger scale. And it's mainly around health, indoor occupant health in particular. And it's, to be blunt, partly driven by the fact that I grew up in England in a house that was not very good. And these things impact on people's health. And ultimately, if buildings aren't good for the people that live in them, then we probably shouldn't be living in buildings. And as we are, if we're going to do it, let's do it well. So I will rant about that as we move forward. So why Passive House? Passive House is a German-originated international building standard, and it does a few things. One of them is comfort. It delivers buildings that have indoor temperatures that range from 20 to 25 degrees year-round. It has a range for internal humidity, which is healthy. There are no cold spots and no hot spots. Sounds quite simple. obviously isn't always, and is certainly not the experience of pretty much every Australian home anyone has ever been in or lived in. So it's really, really important. Why is it important? It's actually important because you can't be healthy if you're not comfortable. So these things go hand in hand. How do we achieve health in a building? Well, firstly, we have comfortable temperatures. And then secondly, we need healthy indoor air. In passive house buildings, we achieve that by having 100% fresh air. So we have mechanical ventilation. It's supplied 24/7. It's to be blunt, a fairly simple box that has two fans inside it. One of them puts air into the house, one of them takes air out of the house. And those two air streams pass each other, transmit the heat energy from one to the other, but they don't mix. So it dumps the moisture from your bathroom outside, it dumps your greasy cooking stuff from inside to outside, brings in air from outside, which we call filtered. We don't use the word fresh because it depends where you live. If you live where Adam lives, probably pretty fresh. If you live on Parramatta Road in Sydney or whatever the equivalents are in the other capital cities, then opening a window is not a guarantee of fresh air. It's just outdoor air. These units have really good filters. Also very good in a bushfire. So some great data about why you want one of these devices if you're going to sit through a bushfire like we did 2 years ago. The supply of fresh air or filtered air, sorry, also allows humidity to be controlled, and that is how we prevent condensation and prevent mold and all of the issues that flow on from that. One of the other key aspects around passive house is actually around quality. Everybody would like to think that they have a quality home, especially someone who has a new home. Obviously, quality is fairly subjective, but for us, one of the metrics is, well, does it do what it said it would do on the box? So this is some data that's pretty old now from a colleague in Canberra, but he built himself a certified passive house. He is a bit of a data nerd, so he collected all this data over the first year and a bit. And as you can see, it's sat in that 20 to 25 and a bit degree range for a very large proportion of the time. He's got no cooling in that house, which is pretty impressive in Canberra, and he really does heat the house with a towel rail, and he really can overheat his house if he leaves the towel rail on for too long. So it's not so much about the no cooling part, because I'm going to contradict that later on, but it's really about the reliability and the optimization that you can achieve in these buildings to deliver them really efficiently and effectively to achieve the results that you want. And I'll talk in a minute about why that's really important. So, here we go. This is why it's important. So, are they sustainable? Well, who the hell knows? Is building a new house sustainable at all? Adam had a slide which had the image of the size of the house and the garden at the bottom. If you're going to spend the time in the garden, do you really need a big house? Do you really need a house at all? Maybe a small shed would be adequate. There's all those aspects to this. But if we are going to build houses, and let's just assume that that's the case, then we really, really need guaranteed performance. Because if as a nation and a planet we're going to meet our carbon emissions reduction goals, we need to know what they're going to be. And if we can't predict what our buildings are going to do, then we're stuffed. If you're going to have a plus minus of 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80%, then obviously any calculations you base anything on are going to be wrong, and they're going to be really wrong. So you need the guarantee that it's going to do what it says. These buildings, as I will explain shortly, are very airtight. This is very good, because it means that they don't change very quickly. So when it gets hot outside, it takes them a long time to heat up. And conversely, when they get cold, it takes a long time to cool down. So this is exceptionally good in extreme weather events. There was some wonderful yet terrible examples in Texas a couple of years ago. And there was some couple of people living in a passive house basically tweeting about how they were going. And they lasted several days before they had to leave with no power. And it was, I forget how sub-zero, but cold. So the resilience in these buildings is great. Increasing climate shocks, that's incredibly important. And especially as the grid is normally the first thing to fail, then it's really, really significant. Building better houses will avoid what we call the lock-in effect. It's not a term that's really well known yet. It should be, but fundamentally, it's the problem we create when we do things. I think Adam's phrase was 3/4 baked. he meant it in a positive way, and in his context it was, but obviously it can also be flipped the other way. So in my context, this is the bad version. So it's when you do something what I would colloquially say half-assed, and it's really meaning that, for example, in a cold climate, you use double glazing when you really need triple glazing. So what you do is you invest most of the embodied carbon, most of the money in a substandard product. And now you've locked in for the next 20, 30 years, substandard performance, both from a health point of view, a comfort point of view, and an energy use point of view, because you didn't use the right product the first time to save yourself $3.50 or whatever it might have been. So as a planet, as a nation, as a city, as a whatever, as a household, every time we make those poor decisions, we create this lock-in effect. So we're actually en masse over time making things worse. It's also pretty easy to see why those things get made, and even though it sounds judgmental, and in some ways it is judgmental, it's also it's trying to emphasize the criticality of getting these things right. Passive houses have incredibly low operational energy. They will use 70 to 90% less energy for heating and cooling than your average home. So I saw an Adam's slide from that co-housing project that they're targeting passive house. That's where they'll get nearly all of their energy savings from. And it's a really smart way to do that, and especially in that climate. And then finally, on this sort of sustainable angle, big picture stuff, it's about reducing embodied carbon through decreasing operational energy needs. What on earth do I mean by that? What I mean is that if this house on the right, the little image there, that's the first certified passive house that we finished. It's the first one in Sydney. It's got a 5.2 kilowatt PV system on the roof, and it almost exactly matches its energy use on a 12 monthly basis. So makes as much as it uses. The client happens to be a marine scientist, and to say that he's a data freak is a massive understatement. He calculated that thing God knows how many times to come up with the size of the system, and he got it spot on right. And the point is that he's got a 5.2 kilowatt system. We've recently done some work on embodied carbon for a competition we entered, and found that the embodied carbon of the PV system is actually a fairly large chunk in a new home. So if we're sizing PV systems to run a house and we're building inefficient houses, then our embodied carbon component of this house is going to go up a lot more than it would from just building the house slightly better to start with. So these things feed off each other, both in positive and negative loops. So that's my big ranty bit. Now, in possibly the wrong order, I'm now going to quickly talk about what is passive house. And I just want to say a few swift things, mindful of the time and trying to get to the discussion part, which is always my favorite bit. So house, not house, basically the origins of the word come from German, and it actually means building, not just house. So it can be anything of any size. There's a shirtload of them around the world in a shirtload of countries. This is an old map. There's more around now than there was when I first made this slide deck. So this is not new. This has been done before. This is not rocket science. The tagline is it's building science. There's a bunch of them in Australia that are bigger than single houses, uni buildings, student accommodation, apartment buildings, fancy houses, bottom left, very fancy house, lovely house. We can't all be living like that, but it's a really good example of what you can do. China, surprisingly, has gone nuts for this. They're building ridiculous amounts of housing, and they realize that they need to build it well because they can only afford to build it once. So this one particular project is bigger than all the passive house other projects in the world, pretty much. And they build it in one big stage in one place, and they're doing multiple of these. So the scale is phenomenal, and that's a good thing, because if we're going to build, we might as well build it well. How do we do it? This is the simplification of the entire system to one slide. There's 5 key components. They're not particularly difficult. Appropriate levels of continuous insulation. So that changes depending on where you are, from, you know, Sydney to Blue Mountains to, we might be doing a job in Mount Hotham, which is very cold. Airtight construction, because you want to have control. You want to be able to control moisture. You want to stop air leakage. And really, you want to have control. This whole thing's basically a control exercise. Minimize thermal bridges. That's partly about energy loss. It's mostly about avoiding cold surfaces on the inside, because cold surfaces equal condensation, which equals mold, which equals health problems. High performance glazing, that also encompasses appropriate shading and really is just about having the right kind of glass. In Sydney and a large part of the country, that's double glazing. As you move up to colder places, that becomes triple glazing. Unsurprisingly, single glazing doesn't cut it. Never will, never did. Doesn't matter what anyone says, it just doesn't work. And finally, mechanical ventilation with heat recovery. And like I started explaining before, it's a fairly simple box. It pumps air around the house into different rooms. It supplies into the rooms where people spend time, bedrooms, living rooms, study, whatever, and extracts from wet places, bathrooms, laundries, and kitchens. Runs all the time, never turn it off. Uses about the same energy as an old school halogen light globe. So basically stuff all, not worth turning off. You won't save enough energy to make it worth the energy it took you to feed yourself to walk to the switch to turn it on and off again. So that's the short version, as short as I can ever be. And they're probably my key things that I want to have a bit of debate about, really. So on that note, I will hand back to Michelle, who will probably hand over to Rob.
Thank you so much, Andy. Really appreciate that. And at lunchtime today, we heard some really great speakers talking about mud brick homes and rammed earth and a few other like Earthship. And the big question was, you know, how do we use sustainable design, sustainable resources for what is effectively the accommodation option for many places on Earth, which is high rise. So it's quite remarkable to see those pictures you showed of China. And we might come back in the questions and discussions to how well they're tracking and are they being monitored in terms of, you know, really doing what they say they're going to do and keep the people happy and healthy too.
Indeed, I look forward to that.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to introduce a new friend, someone I don't know. Hello, Rob. And I'm sorry that I didn't see you when you first came on, so I'll just spotlight you now. So Rob McLeod from Renew, would you like to share with us? I think you're going to be talking about this excellent initiative for renters in renewable housing. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I'll talk you through it. So yeah, Michelle, thanks so much for hosting, and thanks so much, Andy and Adam, for the presentations. I've really enjoyed them. Really good to join you all. My name's Rob. I work at Renew. My work there is as a sustainable housing advocate. So basically, it's my job to advocate for the sorts of government policies and government action that we need to bring homes in Australia up to scratch. Can folks see the shared screen?
Yes,
there?
it's all working.
Yep, great.
Yep, thanks.
And look, so Andy and Adam have really talked about the homes that we want in this country and what we should be doing, both here and elsewhere. I'm taking a bit of a different approach in that we also have to have a conversation about where we're going wrong now and what we really need to fix in the homes that are here, because there's amazing things that we can do in the housing space and building sustainably. But the reality is that the vast majority of existing homes, and particularly homes for people who are renting their home or people who are on low incomes, people who are facing barriers to taking action in their homes, are performing really, really poorly. And it's locking in some really bad costs, both in terms of money, in terms of emissions and climate, and in terms of health and our well-being. And so there's a lot of action that really, really needs to happen on these issues. So look, I guess as a way to start the conversation, it is really important to underline that there's not that one of the really key benefits that is starting to sink into the public conversation about energy efficiency and how we power our homes is the financial side of it. You know, a couple of weeks ago, the federal government projected that energy prices were going to be increasing by about 50% over the next couple of years. And apparently solar companies have just been flat off their feet for the last 2 weeks. You know, the phone just started ringing and it hasn't stopped since then. I think the quote I saw was that one company had a 700% increase in inquiries because people are worried about about where bills are going and how to reduce the cost of living. Energy efficient homes that are powered by renewables really do save money. So Renew's analysis in Melbourne using 2022 tariffs shows that a 7-star efficient all-electric home with solar cuts bills by about 75% from what has been business as usual up until this year. So a dual fuel 6-star home with no solar. For existing homes, smaller homes, potentially rental homes, potentially apartments, even heating and cooling a small space, energy efficiency and your choice of how you do it using efficient electric appliances makes a critical difference. So it's cheaper to heat and cool your home using a reverse cycle air conditioner than it is to just heat your home using a gas heater in a city like Melbourne and swelter through summer. It's significantly better. You're significantly better off if you've also got insulation and better energy efficiency, of course. And there's all of these other benefits to that. We also know that this has to be a part of the energy transition. So as the broader grid shifts from coal and fossil fuels onto renewables, the benefits of electrification really start to add up when it comes to emissions. So in 2014, you would actually be emitting more by switching to a reverse cycle aircon to heat your home instead of gas in Victoria, even if you insulated your home. By 2030, it'll be a small fraction of it, and you're already saving emissions now if you make your home more efficient. And I should note that these figures that I've got on those slides actually include heating and cooling for the reverse cycle air conditioner use. So you're reducing your emissions even if you're cooling. Now, there's other things you can do to cool your home and other design principles that we should be bringing into play, but this just gives you a sense of why this will matter for a lot of people. There's a critical problem though, and that's that there are some really strong barriers that mean that rental homes, in particular, and the homes of people who are on low incomes are performing worse right now than even your really standard owner-occupied homes. Not even looking at homes that qualify for passive house or using best design principles, just standard existing homes. About 30% of Australian homes altogether have rooftop solar, but for rental homes, it's about 5%. There was a study that's come out this year that shows that even in a like-for-like home, controlling for all of the other variables, a home that is otherwise identical but is lived in by a renter will have an 8% higher energy bill than an owner-occupied home because the energy efficiency tends to be worse. Just on that one reason alone. And the health issues are critical. So I'm glad, we just saw the slide about the percentage of time that those passive house qualified homes were a comfortable temperature, even without mechanical cooling. Well, you compare that to where so many homes are at the moment. So Better Renting, an organisation based, it's a national organisation, mostly based out of the ACT, recruited a big cohort of renters to install heat trackers in their homes over the course of this winter. They found in the course of this study that noting that 18 degrees is the World Health Organization standard for what is a healthy, a sufficiently healthy indoor temperature, not ideal, just baseline health requirement, 18 degrees. For homes in all of these in New South Wales, homes that were tracked spent 85% of their time below that level. In Victoria, 80%, in Tasmania, over 90% of the time, they were colder than the WHO minimum health level. You're seeing those average minimum temperatures that they were recording there. 7.5 degrees was the average minimum temperature every day in the Tasmanian rental home over the course of this winter. And 10 degrees, 9 degrees, 12 degrees in these other locations. Look, this is a serious health impact. More people die of cold-related diseases in Australia than they do in Sweden, and our housing is a really, really, really big part of that. So look, this energy transition is underway. It's happening now. And the challenge that we're facing is that transition must not leave anyone behind. Our homes will be a part of this, but there is a real risk that renters, if we leave the policy settings as they are, renters, social housing residents, and people on low incomes, even if they own their own homes, are facing higher barriers to retrofitting their homes than anyone else. And they're the ones who risk getting locked into these high prices and unhealthy homes as the transition continues. there's a real risk that as more and more people who have the means to do it are getting off the grid or off, installing their own solar, disconnecting from gas, increasingly, for example, using electric vehicles charged in their own home using on-site solar, it'll be people who aren't able to take those steps that will actually be locked into higher prices, who are paying an increasing proportion of the entire cost of maintaining that legacy grid that exists. And the social justice implications will be really, really serious to this if we don't take action now. So look, what are the barriers for renters taking action? There's some really key things. So the key thing that you'll hear over and over again, if you're interested in this space, is the problem of split incentives. So basically, if you're an owner-occupier, you pay money up front to increase the energy efficiency of your home. You see a reduction in your energy bills. You pay money to install solar, you get the benefits of that. If you're a renter, though, you're dependent on your landlord to do that. And you're the one who pays the energy bills, but the landlord is the one who pays the upfront cost. And landlords don't see that direct financial benefit. And the reality is, we know empirically it's not happening. Like we know that there are good landlords who are trying to do the right thing and want to rent out healthy and affordable homes. But just the stark reality is, at scale, it's not happening. Even renters shouldn't be expected to pay the cost of these things in a home that they don't, because they don't get the capital benefit. And if you're on a 12-month lease, as is standard in most parts of Australia, say you were to put money up to install solar panels on your rental property, well, there's nothing to stop your landlord saying at the end of that lease, sorry, you're out, kicking you out, and then re-advertising the place at a higher price, potentially advertising the benefit of solar panels as an extra reason to bump up the rent. So it's just not workable to put the pressure on, to put the onus on tenants. It does have to be landlords, and there does have to be mechanisms there. Information is another really critical thing. So a lot of the time, it's very hard to understand what your rights are, what the quality of the home is. Environment Victoria did a secret shopper study a few years back, or a couple of years back, where they went to open for inspections, sent a lot of people out to open inspections to ask the real estate agents, hey, what's the energy efficiency rating of this home? Only 8% of those real estate agents could give any sort of answer about the energy efficiency standards of the home, whether it was worse for rental than it was for owner occupiers, but not by a lot. And so it's really hard to find out this information if you are renting out your home. Finally, and I guess this is where I'll end up on, conscious of time, the lack of government response. So there are some really key government policy levers that need to be pulled to fix this. The key thing is minimum energy efficiency standards. What we are arguing very strongly, and what there's a growing campaign pushing for around the country, is that you should not be able to rent out a home that does not meet minimum energy efficiency and health standards. At the moment, in a lot of states, there's actually so little control, and I think people who aren't in the rental market might not always see this, but there's just so little control or limits on what you can and can't rent out, and what the baseline levels of health and amenity can be in a rental home. But there needs to be a push for all rental homes to actually meet those minimum efficiency standards to resolve this problem and to bring up those worst performing rental homes. Other measures really have to sit alongside that. For some reason, we can get into in Q&A about the arcane aspects of the policies there, but that has to be a cornerstone of to make the rest of the policies work. But there are a lot of things that need to be done. Retrofit programs. So, we are one of many organisations have pushed for large-scale retrofit programs to really bring up the standard of rental homes and homes for people on low incomes. Unfortunately, when we pushed for that during the course of the coronavirus pandemic, instead Home Builder was introduced by the government, and it went in directions that weren't actually helpful and didn't respond to this existing problem. Mandatory labelling rules. So you should, if you're renting out a home or selling a home, you should actually have to say what the energy efficiency rating of it is. So sellers and landlords should be required to get an energy efficiency scorecard rating done, or get an NATAS assessment done, and share that as part of the advertising. There can be financial incentives, absolutely. We also need to be building high-performing social housing, because that can support industry to be ready to do what we need to do in all housing. Plus, there's a massive need for to plug the gap in social housing that's causing so many problems in our broader housing system in general. Finally, planning now to avoid the gas death spiral. Gas death spiral, gas death spiral, gas death spiral. I think say it 10 times. It's really, really hard, but it's a really important concept for us to be thinking of now, because as we see more and more homes electrifying, and it will happen over the course of the next few years, and more homes are making this shift, there is a real risk that it will be the homes who are least able to get on board with that, who will be left paying an increasing share of the gas network costs. And that will be, if that cost falls increasingly on renters and people on low incomes, there will be that is a perverse outcome of needed action. But we need to plan for how we can make sure that that's an inclusive and fair transition. I'm very conscious of time again, so just noting in wrapping up, there are things happening now. Just yesterday, the ACT became the first state or territory in Australia to introduce mandatory insulation as a minimum standard for all rental homes. So this is exactly what we need, and this is exactly what all states need to follow. ACT is following the lead of New Zealand, and it's a crying shame that this is the first time it's happened in Australia, but it is absolutely the right step, and they're doing a fantastic thing alongside other work. Victoria has introduced minimum heating standards, although when it comes to energy efficiency, they are still actually really, really weak. But there are steps in the right direction. There's good incentives, including incentives to replace gas heaters with reverse cycle aircon, and for renters to install solar panels in a fair way. The government's promised that there will be minimum standards for installation as well, and hot water heating, though we haven't seen it delivered yet. So that's something that we're really pushing for down here. Finally, the federal government is aware of this. Is starting. There are wheels turning in the federal government around these issues. Today, the federal government has announced a new consultation on a new national energy performance strategy. If people are interested in this and in the policy side of things and making submissions to this, calling for what we need when it comes to improving energy efficiency in this country, this is a useful thing to be doing, and it is an important opportunity, because the federal government is thinking about what it can be doing in this space, and we're really going to be pushing them hard for action on homes, that put homes at the centre of this. There really is pressure building, and there's a big alliance of organisations as well as people at the grassroots who are taking action on this. And shout out to In Queensland Energetic Communities is kicking off Healthy Homes for All campaign in Queensland to introduce minimum standards there in Queensland, as well as a broader national campaign called Healthy Homes for Renters, which we're really involved with. I think that's probably about all the time that I should carry on for, so I will leave it there.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was really interesting and very important, particularly for our week of discussions about the affordability, accessibility, livability of homes, and the kinds of policy and discussions that need to happen. So I'm just going to try to do my best to bring our three of our speakers back. Andy, if you're there, you need to be using video for me to spotlight you and sort of make you visible to the others.
There we go.
There we go. Excuse me. Oh, how peculiar. I don't normally get the sneezes in Brisbane in November. So thank you so much for those discussions, guys. And I say, guys, we have had all female panels. I just want to point out, folks, we have had all female panels this week. So don't get freaked out by the all boy panel. I'm going to run through a couple of the questions here that our group has asked, and obviously feel free to elaborate on any points you think are relevant. Just a couple of nice comments too. Maggie has said, Adam, I love seeing the guiding principles expressed in design. That's excellent. JP's mentioned Canadians' experience of Aussie homes, colder inside than out in the winter, hotter inside than out in the summer. I did hear once an English friend say the coldest winter they ever had was in Sydney because the houses were just so cold. All right, Adam has actually asked a question. Adam, do you want to read your question, or would you like me to read your question?
Oh, do me the pleasure. You
I
can read it.
shall. All right. Adam has said, as households go all electric and private transport is home charged EV, how much bigger do our PV systems need to be?
And can I add something to that?
Yes, absolutely.
El Nino, La Nina. When it's cloudy twice as often in La Nina season, I need twice as much PV. And once I plug in my electric car, which takes one charge, takes sort of 4 or 5 days of household power, what sort of industrial system am I looking at needing to be, autonomous with energy? I won't say off grid. And I reckon Andy might have an answer to that.
The answer to every question is, well, it depends.
Depends.
Look, the weather related bit's a massive factor. You're right. Like, we've had clients who've had issues where their power production has just fallen off a cliff. And if you're off grid, as you well know, or most people would understand, like, that's fairly problematic. The short answer is probably not much. You probably need an extra couple of kilowatts normally. The massive factor in that, though, and it's in your question, is home charged EV. It depends if it is home charged. Because if in the traditional world you get up and drive to work in the morning, then your car's not at home when you charge it. So there's so many factors in it. I think ultimately it doesn't really matter, in that most people are, for better or worse, sizing PV systems to suit an inverter size, because there's an economy to that. And I think holistically, as a sort of society, as long as the grid still functions, which is a massive little asterisk on the whole thing, then the fact that some people oversize and some people, for practical reasons, trees, whatever it is, won't have anything, I think it will sort of balance out. It's just, you could pay a consulting firm $1 gazillion to model this, and I'm sure the government will, but the answer will still come back to, there's so many, we don't know. Yeah. And for, look, several $100,000, I'm happy to write that on a piece of paper as well.
Can I just add, certainly though, the question is extremely relevant, and we've been discussing it on and off throughout the new economy and the economics for the earth discussions we've had this year, because demand management in itself is often forgotten in the big picture transition toward renewable energy. We've had a post-extractivist hub inside NENA for a couple of years, and they held 2 excellent green extractivism and the green energy transition discussions, where people are saying, look, it might be fabulous to turn everything to renewables, but if everyone keeps demanding what Australian households demand, we're basically going to need another couple of planets to provide that level of lifestyle. So these are really important issues, for the beginnings of this transition. If folks are going home and plugging their electric vehicle in and charging their own power, that's great. But there's this big argument about how many electric vehicle cars can we handle versus just switching over to a lot more affordable, usable public transport, mass transit, blah blah blah. These are big complex issues. Hey.
Yeah, for sure. And then, I mean, as a counter tug of war to that, I love having enough land to grow food, but for transport to really work, you need to live slightly more densely than I live. And suddenly you're then looking at food being shipped in diesel or whatever vast distances between dense centres that operate with transport and hinterlands that produce food.
And certainly on these bigger picture issues, and we'll come back in a moment to more specific questions to your talks, what we're finding inside the new economy and the Australian Earth Laws Alliance is the only way to really think about this at the big picture, whole of landscape policy and society level is place-based. If you're looking at communities in Sydney and they really want to live there, what do they all have to do to live in that place? But if you're looking at a regional town in the middle of a semi-arid area, what do they have to do to live there forever? So there's no one hit wonder, there's no one answer fits all, but it's been shown year after year after year by that ecological footprint method that if everybody lived like Australians, we would need 4.5 planets. So we're definitely not getting it right yet, but we'll come back to that. So So demand management questions are very important and a little bit close to my heart because I did my PhD on regulating consumption. There's a question from Alison, which is a great question for someone like me who lives in the tropics. I have to ask whether passive house, and I'm sorry, I can't say it the right way, passive house has ever been done in hot climates.
Unsurprisingly, yes. It's trickier, but it's been done in like hot, arid places, which is tricky, but also in proper hot, humid places. There's a garment factory of all things in Sri Lanka that got certified as a passive house building. Look, it's hard because of dehumidification. So funnily enough, Brisbane's not actually, when you look at climate data, Brisbane's not that hot. It's just bloody humid. And that's tricky to do. There's a house that there's like almost got their certification for passive house. And there's one in Brisbane that hit that target. But it is doable. It just involves design changes. Fundamentally, pretty much every Australian building is overglazed. And if you don't overglaze your buildings, it becomes a lot easier. So yes, I could talk for hours, but yes, very doable.
Some of my students were talking about not a passive house, but a passive room. So on those extremes, the room that you spend most of your time in can attain those performances, but the entire house not always at that state.
And can I just mention that again, lunchtime today, they were showing us these designs for the Earthship model, which again is only good for single dwellings, but a remarkable design where they actually put a greenhouse at the front, which absorbs a lot of heat, grows food, and then by being up against rammed earth, it's changing the whole solar passive idea again, keeping things at a really moderate temperature. So obviously there's lots of ways to combine all of these different ideas and technologies. Pretty exciting.
It is. I mean, the short version is that keeping people warm is not the problem. It's not hard. It's really simple. Keeping people cool is the challenge we face.
Yes.
Heating's fine. And like Adam made the comment, put on some Ugg boots if you have to. Most places in Australia is going to come nowhere near killing. Maybe not good for your health, but that's solvable. Heat's the absolute killer. And yes, the cool room thing can work. The practical question ends up being it's like a bushfire refuge. It's fine if you're going to go there for a couple of hours, but if you discover you need to spend your entire working day in that one room every day, then something's gone wrong. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah.
There's merit to it, though. It's big picture, it's not going to solve the problems we need to solve.
Yeah, I hear that, because in Brisbane, the heat, that's the one. Okay, some more good questions here. What have we got? Gary from Canberra has said, hello from cold Canberra, home of the Ngunnawal people. My question, how do we address issues such as building defects, dodgy installations of solar panels, unregulated profit margins of builders, etc., as we move towards more sustainable housing? I'm reluctant to put in solar panels because if I get hit with a dodgy installation, I'm on my own. All these problems plague the normal building industry, and they will be carried over to the sustainable building industry unless more regulatory controls are put in place. ? Comments?
I could chip in on some. Building defects, yes, huge problem. Well, firstly, we shouldn't have privatized the regulation of our buildings. We could reverse that at any point, but it seems politically unlikely. So blowing the trumpet for passive house, it's an international building standard. One of the things you have to do is pass a blower door test to prove how airtight your building is. It's pretty hard to build an airtight building and build a shit building at the same time. So therefore, I would say it's one way to make sure you get there. As to some of those other comments, you can't regulate profit. That's never going to happen. But the solar panels, basically it is regulation, and we walked away from it. We thought that we didn't need it, and we've been proven wrong, but no one's prepared to put their hand up and say we got it wrong. Rob's probably got something more constructive to say.
No, that nails it. That nails it. Look, before I was working at Renew on sustainable housing, I worked on the issue of a whole bunch of apartments in Melbourne which had flammable cladding installed. So I think a lot of you will know the history of the Grenfell Tower in London. It's a devastating and awful history. There are literally thousands of buildings in Australia that have had very, very similar types of cladding installed, that have had it sitting up there because, basically it was imported. It was approved for import because it was, people saw a benefit to that. But then, the builders who built these big things no longer had to go through independent council surveyors in the way that, as you say, Andy, they basically paid privatized surveyors to tick off on the buildings. And now the cost of doing this is just there are all of these people who are now living in buildings which still have this on there and, really are facing this ongoing risk. The cost of getting rid of it is coming into the, it's eye-watering numbers to actually do it and make buildings safe at a baseline level. When you see what the government has proposed, people are trying to build, there's an entire process called building confidence that they've come up with to try and restore some sort of confidence in the way that things are done in the sector, but it's not working, it's not happening. And I'm skeptical and troubled about whether we can actually, how easy it's going to be to fix this problem. Like, absolutely, we need compliance. We need to be testing homes. We should be doing a full assessment, including blower door test of huge numbers of homes, if not all homes. But it's just not happening at the moment, and it's a critical issue.
Yeah, I think the blower door test is great because it's a performance measure, and if the builder knows that that blow is going to come, they are not going to cut corners because they've got to take cladding off, refit windows, do all sorts of things to get the air tightness. And if you can build that into a construction contract, that the air tightness is part of what they're delivering, you're well on the way. But that's going to cost way more compared to your dodgy builder who's cutting corners and not on site every day when all the different trades are walking through, cutting holes in things. Is that your experience with the cost, Andy? To get that quality, it comes with a premium?
Look, it's definitely more expensive, but our buildings are more expensive because they're custom designed and built by custom builders. So that's inherently the case at the moment, but this is the thing we're trying to fix. I think you're correct now, and the logic's strong and you can't argue against it. But I reckon that the medium-term answer is it won't be, because the stuff that they have to do to create the building isn't much more than they currently do today. And the blower door testing at the right point in the construction period will pick up the problem and they can fix it.
Right.
And it's like the thing in California. So they mandated everyone had to use, they wanted to mandate double glazing. Everyone said, no, it'll be too expensive and the world will end. They mandated it. Within 12 months, you couldn't buy single glazing, and double glazing was the same price that single used to be, which also doesn't make sense because there's twice as much.
The industry just stepped up to it, and it became the new normal. Yeah.
And without falling in the policy hole, when you fall in the policy hole about all of the, what do they call them, the return on investment bullshit things that they do, construction code, every one of them massively overestimates the cost of change. Every bit of data proves that they're wrong, but they still use the other one. So I think it's in the same boat. I guess
we had a.
I was just going to say, linking it to a comment from Maggie, one of the folks in our audience today, the Australian taxpayer already forgoes billions of dollars per annum of tax dollars that are given to rental home investors, so the people who buy the houses. Surely we need a percentage of those returns to make sustainable properties for renters. We need landlords to step up and be accountable for the quality of their properties. And, again, linking it back to some of the issues that we discuss inside the New Economy Network, Richard Dennis from the Australia Institute, when he gives a rundown of the budget, reminds us that when you talk to politicians and other decision makers about what they fund, If they say they can't afford something, it's not that they can't, they're just not interested in that priority. They're happy to put $11 billion a year as subsidies toward fossil fuels, somewhere between, throughout the discussions this week, somewhere between 40 and $70 billion of tax breaks for the kinds of people who do own properties. So surely if they really wanted to, they could heavily subsidize profoundly fabulous sustainable buildings for everybody that were comfortable and livable. Or we could just go with, our 20-year plan for, what is it, 80 billion on submarines. So, they're expensive in the marketplace, but if they were a priority for our society, maybe that would happen. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that that wish that government would lead rather than follow and put out fires, put out cladding nightmare fires. Just if the governments were more proactive and ahead of the game a little bit, it would make things go so much more smoothly and that transition so much more rapid, I think.
It really would. Yeah, and that's not just pointing the finger, as we always say.
No, I mean it's a crisis that I see how difficult it is.
Yeah, and the single largest allocation of collective resources happens every year through the federal budget in this country. So, there are ways to tweak this stuff to make it better for people. And we should no longer tolerate the excuse that they can't afford it. Sorry, Rob.
Yeah.
Oh, no. I mean, look, I'm in furious agreement. And I think it comes to us like in organizations, in campaigns, in movements, in our grassroots activism. Like actually, we have to make them do it, and we have to actually show that it's on us to make this happen. Like when you look at homes, like there's been this argument for so many of us have been fighting this argument for so long, where you have governments and you have people in business and so on saying, oh, yes, people sort of care about climate change, but it costs too much to do anything about it, so people will ignore it. Well, here, homes are a thing where fixing the problems that we face today actually are consistent with what we need to do in climate. We can make our lives better, make our homes more comfortable, reduce our costs, all of these things, and take the action that we need on climate all at once by doing some of these things that we're pushing for. Like we've got a really strong case to make, and I think that it's on us to be organising around this and actually showing people that, hey, look, we can be, there is a way forward, and the stories that you've heard about these things are just wrong because we actually, like this is win-win-win.
Yeah, well, and that's again, I just want to remind folks, tomorrow we're having a very small and humble 1 to 1.5 hour roundtable discussion. Speakers from this week and all participants are invited to come and have a yarn. We're going to dig out and dust off the kind of shared creation of the NENA housing strategy, not so much for each one of us to lobby the same thing, but to have a shared picture together of the kinds of things that we need to get behind and support. So whether you can join us or not, we'll also make sure that we send out a copy of it on a Google Doc to everyone who's signed up for this week. And we genuinely just love you to share your ideas. Proposals could be vague, it could be specific, but we do feel that little groups, I mean, NENA's got nearly 3,000 people on a mailing list. We wish we were bigger, we're volunteer run, but we want more and more people to be understanding that we don't have to tolerate the old stories, that we should be demanding better quality everything for our peoples and our environment. So on that note, we've got about 3 minutes left. There are a couple of comments rather than questions, so I might just wrap up a few of them together. JP wrote, imagine getting the federal government's ear on all of these excellent initiatives. I'm just catchphrasing her. There are earthships for tropical climates. Yes, there are. Francis mentioned that in the UK, you're not allowed to rent houses below a specific efficiency standard. And that's good, but I have lived in the UK for a couple of years, and I have definitely lived in some houses that were a little bit lacking in their quality. So I think even when you've got good regulatory standards, it's about the compliance, the enforcement of those
implementation.
Standards. Absolutely. Yeah, they might have the rules, but sometimes not everyone's going to be noticing how very dodgy their heating and cooling and showers or lack thereof are. I think that's about it. We've done well tonight. We've covered off some good core issues. I have to say, someone actually put a private comment in when I mentioned the budget allocation for the submarines. Someone who I shall not name said, well, we could all go and live in a submarine. And I jokingly replied saying, well, we may have to, and it could be a good climate change strategy.
Airtight and watertight.
Air quality standards for submarines, the US Marine, there's a publication that shows what it is.
Yeah.
This is the best air quality in the world. Because they lock them up for months on end. It has to be. Like the primo thing.
I
So,
can't imagine, particularly, anyway.
you
But
don't
look,
want guys controlling nuclear weapons to be having brain fuzz because the CO2 levels are too high. So
oh, we shouldn't laugh. It's we didn't mean to be flippant, but I wanted to share that comment because I did think it was like this tragic
It's funny.
irony.
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
I'll take a yellow submarine, and not one of those big black nuclear ones.
That's right. In the octopus's garden too. Thank you very much. All righty. Well, look, thank you so much, Rob, Adam, and Andy. It's been a really fascinating discussion. And as we've had comments today from at the lunchtime and this evening session, that it's a very uplifting discussion to be talking about what's possible, to be seeing the photos of these beautiful designed buildings, and just a cheerful reminder that the ancient Romans, thousands of years ago, could get some of their heating and cooling right without any electricity. Surely we can do a little better, and surely we can be designing thoughtful, amazing homes that are fair and just and affordable. Okay, so guys, if you would like to say just farewell, good night, and then we'll sign off. I don't like being the only final word for the night. So Adam, did you have any parting comments before we head off?
Oh, just thanks so much for the robust discussion and for having me, and lovely to meet you all. I'd like to stay connected.
Yeah, thank you. We'll be cheerfully harassing you all in the future, getting your input to ideas as we try our best to share those. So yeah, and
Bring it
Andy,
on.
yeah, thank you.
again, a big thank you for letting me be involved, and definitely want to stay connected and help do what we can from our point of view. And also just a quick positive spin, but note, and Rob may know more, but keep a close eye on Sustainability Victoria, which is the Victorian sort of state government stuff. They're doing some awesome stuff, but also Development Victoria, who are probably going to build a shit ton of passive house social housing projects, because they have realized, partly because a couple of key people have been in their ear and that's got jobs there now, that they have no choice but to build these things well, because they've got to look after them for the next couple of decades. And it's the same reason Monash Uni's also done great work, because they're long-term building owners. That's where the future is at. Regular turn them over developers are not the place to waste your energy, unfortunately.
No, and it makes so much sense to do it properly. So thank you, Andy. That is exciting and encouraging. And Rob.
Yeah, absolutely exciting and encouraging, and all power to the people who've been pushing for that. Yeah, look, I just want to say thank you to all of this. This is a volunteer-run network, and lots of work goes into these things, and lots of work that people don't always see. And I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who's been volunteering and putting in time to make this happen, and the network more broadly. And really looking forward to staying in touch.
Thank you. Yeah, we appreciate it. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care. And if you can join us tomorrow, I think it's 12:30 to 1:30 Brisbane time for just a quick chat with everyone, and then we'll stay in touch for sure. So thank you, everyone. Take care and have a good night. Yeah.
See ya.
Bye.